Before you'll say anything, yes, I did steal this idea from Jack Edwards, but in my defense, it's a very good idea. And also, notice me, senpai! Oh no, I hate doing that. Even for the beer, that was weird. That was weird. Okay, I'm in a sort of not quite accidental Aziraphale cosplay right now, which is gonna make sense later and be even funnier. But for now, I also just look fucking great. So, like, W's in the chat for me, folks. Everyone go down there and tell me how hot I am, please. For reference, this is what an actual cosplay of Aziraphale looks like when I do it. It's better. It's better when I'm committing all the way. That was the last time I went to a Comic-Con as well, by the way. 2019. It's a long time. It's a long time ago. So, I love books. I want to be an author, so that's probably not a huge surprise to anyone. But to be clear, books have been my lifeline for my entire life. As I've grown, that's expanded into TV and movies and poetry and video games. And it really just comes down to the fact that words are everything to me. Words are the reason the world goes around. Words are what connects us, a reaching hand of humanity between every person. I'm obsessed with language and translation and art and conversation because there are sentences that will never perfectly translate into another language, and there are words that exist in all of them. I'm studying Korean because it's a language so different from my native one that it creates different kinds of stories and idioms and structures conversations differently, which affects the way their prose flows, and I think it's incredible. I watch shows and movies in every language because I want to absorb as many of the cultures as possible because that's how society progresses. Not by ignoring or stamping out the differences, but by holding them up, connecting them to our own, making the differences known but not othered. And that's why this writer's strike is important. We don't pay our artists living wages because we think of artistic pursuits as callings that they should be lucky to earn a cent from. Never mind that the world would stop turning if we stopped having shows to watch and books to read. Never mind that those writers on strike right now are probably the only reason most people got through the pandemic with some sanity intact. Never mind that the narrative being spun against them, that they're all millionaires who don't deserve more money, is being spun by the actual billionaires who don't do any of the backbreaking creative work that builds these shows and movies from the ground up. So today, and every day, I want to celebrate writers and writing by convincing you to read my favourite books by reading their best quotes. And if you like this, I'm going to do a follow-up with TV shows and maybe movies too, and maybe I'll revisit books again, just because there are never enough words for me to devour and then yell about from mountaintops. So, without further ado, this is how you lose the Time War. I'd like to thank Biggless Dickless for their contributions to reigniting this book's popularity because it's been a genuine delight to watch the whole saga unfold and see this book get the hype it deserves. I could have picked one of the many quotes in this book about love, and God, I almost did. Especially the one about killing poets. Those who know, look me in the eyes and tell me that that didn't KO you on the spot. But I wanted to pick a subtler example of the way this book examines love, and one that's in line with what I started this video talking about, words. Because this book is about two people who should never ever fall in love, falling in love through letters and words, and there's nothing more soul-destroyingly beautiful than that. There's a kind of time travel in letters, isn't there? I imagine you laughing at my small joke, I imagine you groaning, I imagine you throwing my words away. Do I have you still? Do I address empty air and the flies that will eat this carcass? You could leave me for 5 years, you could return never. And I have to write the rest of this, not knowing. God damn. And it's like this big. Some of these I understand you not wanting to read after I've described them to you because some of them are quite large, but this is this big! And it's all written like that in this beautiful, beautiful prose. Like, God, spare a couple of hours. This took me like an hour to get through. It'll take most people a little bit more than that because I speed read, but like, spare a couple of hours. You know, go to the library. If Biggless Dickless didn't convince you to read this book, I really hope this extra nudge did. And if it didn't, then there's really nothing that I can do. Next up, everyone you hate is going to die. If you haven't yet heard of Daniel Sloss, then what on earth are you doing? Get on Netflix and watch his Jigsaw special right now, especially if you're going to cancel your Netflix subscription soon, like I am. It changed my life, and it's changed the lives and perspectives of almost every person I've shown it to. He's a crass, brash, hilarious Scottish comedian whose aforementioned comedy special has caused divorces and relationship endings in the tens or maybe hundreds of thousands. This is a good thing. Any marriage or relationship that ends because of the things he says in that special were doomed to fail from the start. He just got them there sooner. He's had specials since then that have also done really well. X went viral a few years ago with his take on male toxicity and culture, and he's unbearably funny, but he's also got a lot to say about life and philosophy and humanity. And if he heard me talk about it so wankily, he'd probably hate it. So sups, lost, books, great, hope the tours continue to sell out. Since the specials, he's also released a book, a memoir of sorts called Everyone You Hate Is Going to Die, or, more long-windedly, Everyone You Hate Is Going to Die, and other comforting thoughts on family, friends, sex, love, and more things that ruin your life. It's a great book, and obviously very funny, but as per usual with Daniel Sloss, wrapped up in all those little quips are nuggets of genuine wisdom, one of the most important of which, I believe, is this. You are not responsible for the happiness of other human beings. You are absolutely allowed to do everything within your power to make them happy, and you should, but it is not your fucking job. And if it feels like your job, quit. That's not a relationship, that's a job. Fuck that. Going backwards a bit, this is the series of books that I was hooked on in my teen years. I didn't know the word hyperfixation back then, but oh boy! I've met the author, got all my books signed, he's lovely, and still reread all the original series every few years because the nostalgia of these characters is so strong. One day, I hope to be in a writer's room for the show version of them. Manifesting! There's a million quotes I could pick. But honestly, the one that's become the banner quote for the whole fandom is probably the best place to start. Stephanie looked up from her desk as Skulduggery knocked on the window. She opened it. "I thought girls were supposed to be tidy," he said as he peered in. Stephanie kicked some underwear under her bed and ignored the comment. "You okay out there?" "I've been perched on worse roofs, believe me. My parents have gone to work, you know. You could have used the door." Doors are for people with no imagination. Skulduggery Pleasant is fantastic. It's insanely quippy and fun and violent and intense, and I love it with my entire heart. I grew up with these books way more than I grew up with Harry Potter because I was a bit too young to grow up with them. The last book came out when I was like 7 or 8, but not these. So as a big middle finger to Joanne, I suggest you let all your 13-year-olds read these instead. Or Artemis Fowl, or Percy Jackson. Anything not written by a bigoted transphobe, mainly. The bar is low. But also there are so many amazing books and series out there. Go hunting. You don't have to settle for Harry Potter just because it's the biggest one. Next up, Pride and Prejudice. Anybody who knows me knows how passionate I am about Jane Austen, and this book is the reason. Changing gears entirely, welcome to the first favourite book I ever had. Pride and Prejudice still holds such a special place in my heart. It really does. I don't even have a favourite quote because every time I reread it, I find a new one that I had somehow not fallen in love with the previous time, and everything about this book is a goddamn masterpiece. Just scroll through the Goodreads quotes page for this book. There's one for practically every occasion. Those of you who know the book or have seen the series, or much to my personal dismay, the 2005 movie, may already be trying to guess the quote I'm about to use. Maybe it's Darcy's most ardent first proposal. Maybe it's the way Lizzie destroys him right after. Maybe it's the second time he confesses his love, where he admits he doesn't know quite when he fell because he was in the middle before he knew he began. All of these are god tier quotes that I would praise until the heat death of the universe, but they're also all ones that most people know. Honestly, in terms of convincing you to read this book, I wanted to highlight one of the moments that makes Lizzie and Darcy so perfect for me. Because people misunderstand this book a lot as like a grumpy man changing himself for a woman. And it's kind of true, he does, but part of that is that both of them are too caught up in their ideas of the world to actually listen to each other. Darcy's mistakes are worse, but Lizzie is just as stubborn, and that's why they work. Because you understand why they don't get along, but that's also exactly why they're so perfect for each other once they really try to get to know one another. This exchange takes place early-ish in the novel, when they're still at odds with each other and are having a spirited debate among a group of high society people. Elizabeth turned away to hide a smile. "Your examination of Mr. Darcy is over, I presume," said Miss Bingley. "And pray what is the result? I am perfectly convinced by it that Mr. Darcy has no defect. He owns it himself without disguise." "No," said Darcy, "I have made no such pretension. I have faults enough, but they are not, I hope, of understanding. My temper I dare not vouch for. It is, I believe, too little yielding, certainly too little for the convenience of the world. I cannot forget the follies and vices of others so soon as I ought, nor their offences against myself. My feelings are not puffed about with every attempt to move them. My temper would perhaps be called resentful. My good opinion once lost is lost forever." "That is a failing indeed," cried Elizabeth. "Implacable resentment is a shade in the character. You have chosen your fault well. I really cannot laugh at it. You are safe from me." There is, I believe, in every disposition a tendency to some particular evil, a natural defect, which not even the best education can overcome. "And your defect is a propensity to hate everybody." "Yours," he replied with a smile, "is willfully to misunderstand them." That conversation is everything to me. That conversation is the foundation upon which their relationship is built. They know each other's flaws from like day dot, and they don't like each other for them. But by knowing each other's flaws from the outset, it means that they're able to accommodate each other a lot easier later on when they're apologizing and forgiving, and he becomes a bit more forgiving of her issues even after he's repeatedly said that he's not a forgiving man. Read this and tell me you don't believe in love again. Or if the language of it is too hard for you, which I totally understand, like not everybody likes reading old timey Englishy stuff, watch the show. Or if even that is too much sort of fancy old language for you, watch the Lizzie Bennet Diaries on YouTube, because that's also fantastic. You can watch the 2005 movie, but please don't tell me about it, because it makes me really upset that that's what most people associate with this book, because it is just vastly inferior in so many ways. And like in a way, like I don't usually get that upset about bad adaptations. I'm going to talk about that in a video I've got coming up about adaptations, but like you've all seen my videos on Persuasion. Hey, speaking of love, how about the opposite? Loveless is a novel by Arrowace author Alice Oseman, say that 5 times fast, who you probably know better as the author of Heartstopper, which is now an award-winning Netflix show. And in a book full of poignant quotes about love and friendship and discovering who you are, I'm gonna pick a quote about masturbating. You're welcome! Something she'd said struck me. Wait, I said. I mean, I don't imagine myself with any gender. She paused. Oh, what? It clicked in my brain what I was trying to say. I don't think about myself having sex, I said. Rooney frowned, then she snorted, and then upon realizing I wasn't joking, she frowned again. What do you think about then? Other people? Yeah. Like, people you know? Ew, no! Oh my god! More like made-up people in my brain. Rooney let out a deep breath. So you don't think about having sex with Jason? No! I exclaimed. The thought of having sex with Jason freaked me out. People don't actually do that, do they? What? Fantasize about someone they have a crush on? And as soon as she said it, I realized how obvious it was. Of course people did that. I'd seen it dozens of times in movies and on TV and in fanfics. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit because I think this is important. This has to be a joke, I blurted. I sat up, pushing the covers off my body. Everyone has to be fucking joking! People are really out there just thinking about having sex all the time and they can't even help it? People have dreams about it because they want it that much? I'm losing it. I thought all the movies were exaggerating, but you're all really out there just craving genitals and embarrassment. This has to be some kind of huge joke. There was a long silence. Rooney cleared her throat. Guess we're not wank fantasy sisters? For fuck's sake, Rooney. I don't think this conversation had gone to a place that either of us were expecting to. I'd never fantasized about myself having sex. And that was different from most people. I was different. How had I never realized this before? Picturing fanfic characters having sex? Great, fine, sexy. But picturing myself having sex with anyone, guy, girl, whoever, didn't interest me. No, it was more than that. It was an immediate fucking turn-off. I'd had this realization that I had never been a part of my sexual fantasies a few years ago. It was part of what helped me realize I was ace. Watch that journey here. But if I'd read this book when I was like 14, I would have had a much easier teen existence and I would have felt a lot less othered from the people around me. You're not wrong or broken for not wanting sex, you're just different. And that's okay. And speaking of different, and the place in the video where my outfit finally becomes relevant, good omens! This book was the first tattoo I ever got. I have no idea if that's showing up on camera. If not, I'll just take a photo and I'll put it and I'll insert it into the video. And if anybody ever wants a tattoo talk, do let me know. And it's meant a lot to me over the course of my adult life. Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett are two of my favourite authors of all time, and their books are brilliant, and so are they, and this book feels like the Venn diagram of all of it. Also, the TV series is amazing, and I cannot wait for season 2. I am vibrating about it. But before season 2 comes out, there's plenty of time for you to read the book. Somewhat counterproductively, I'm not picking a quote by either Crowley or Aziraphale for this, even though they're the main characters and my two favourite creatures. I'm picking a quote by Death, because Death is pretty much always my favourite character in any piece of literature.
Foreshadowing is a literary device and
also because Death is in particular a character that Terry carries over into a lot of his literature. It's the same Death through most of his Discworld novels, and I just think that's really neat. Thank you. It continued. I must commend your devotion to duty, sir. The late delivery man was falling through a grey mist, and all he could see were 2 spots of blue that might have been eyes and might have been distant stars. Don't think of it as dying, said Death. Just think of it as leaving early to avoid the rush. The delivery man had a brief moment to wonder whether his new companion was making a joke, and to decide that he wasn't. And then there was nothing. God, it's so good. Everything in this book is so good. Like, every single thing. Crowley had seen Mary Poppins on television one Christmas. Indeed, behind the scenes, Crowley had had a hand in most television, although it was on the invention of the game show that he truly prided himself. He toyed with the idea of a hurricane as an effective and incredibly stylish way of disposing of the queue of nannies that would certainly form or possibly stack up in a holding pattern outside the cultural attaché Regent's Park residence. He contented himself with a wildcat tube strike, and then when the day came, only one nanny turned up. This book has everything. The 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse show up. Death shows up just as like a side character. That's what I'm so obsessed with about this book, is that it makes gods and monsters side characters in this little story about the Antichrist being kind of pseudo-raised by an angel and a demon who aren't supposed to be friends. Like, what an iconic plot this is! I would kill to come up with something as good as this. I really would. I would sacrifice Neil Gaiman to pagan gods. I'm kidding, Neil, please. I love you so much. I couldn't even get through that joke because I felt bad immediately as I was saying it. But everyone go read this book. Next up, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Just go read this book. In fact, go read everything Douglas ever wrote and then read it again. If anybody is my inspiration as a writer, it's Douglas Adams. And Neil and Terry and Jane, obviously. But Douglas Adams, of all the authors I admire and venerate, seems to have been the most like me. He was a procrastinator because he was a perfectionist, and he wrote about humanity and how ridiculous and wonderful and destructive and heartbreaking we all are, and he did it with jokes and witty dialogue and nonsense and fun. This isn't just Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, this is the whole trilogy of 4, so don't be put off by how big this book is. This is 4 much smaller books smushed together into a big brick that doesn't hang in the sky the way ships do. That is a reference to this book, yeah. I love him. I love his novels. So I'm just going to read the first page of this one. Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that they still think digital watches are a pretty neat idea. The planet has, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Most of the people living on it were unhappy for pretty much of the time. Many solutions were suggested for this problem, but most of these were largely concerned with the movements of small green pieces of paper, which is odd because on the whole it wasn't the small green pieces of paper that were unhappy. And so the problem remained. Lots of people were mean and most of them were miserable, even the ones with digital watches. Many were increasingly of the opinion that they'd all made a big mistake in coming down from the trees in the first place. And some said that even the trees had been a bad move and that no one should have ever left the oceans. And then, one Thursday, nearly 2,000 years after one man had been nailed to a tree for saying how great it would be to be nice to people for a change, a girl sitting on her own in a small cafe in Rickmansworth suddenly realised what it was that had been going wrong this whole time. And she finally knew how the world could be made a good and happy place. This time it was right, it would work, and no one would have to get nailed to anything. Sadly, however, before she could get to a phone to tell anyone about it, a terrible, stupid catastrophe occurred, and the idea was lost forever. Next up, Agatha Christie, and then there were none. Death is a theme in a lot of my book recommendations.
Foreshadowing is alliterative.
And maybe that's something I've got to work through. Or maybe it's just that I was so obsessed with murder mystery novels between the ages of 9 and 16 that I owned every single book Agatha Christie ever published. Hold for applause. And Then There Were None is one of the greatest mystery novels ever written, as are a number of Agatha Christie's novels, and any tropes of the genre that you think are old hat or predictable probably only exist and became so predictable because Christie used them or created them, and then everybody else wanted to be like her. She's the most sold author in the world, accepted to only the Bible and Shakespeare, and for good goddamn reason. Contradictorily, I'm not going to pick quotes about death from this novel. I'm picking 2 different ones, one from the very start and one from the very end. There was something magical about an island. The mere word suggested fantasy. You lost touch with the world. An island was a world of its own, a world perhaps from which you might never return. He thought, I'm leaving my ordinary life behind me. And, smiling to himself, he began to make plans, fantastic plans for the future. He was still smiling when he walked up the rock-cut steps. That's about the island that they're all about to be trapped on and picked off one by one. This book is a masterpiece. And the final quote, from towards the end of the book, "It was my ambition to invent a murder mystery that no one could solve. But no artist, I now realise, can be satisfied with art alone. There is a natural craving for recognition which cannot be gainsaid. I have, let me confess it in all humility, a pitiful human wish that someone should know just how clever I have been." Yes, that is written by the murderer. But are they wrong? Murderers are just humans too, and Agatha Christie understood that better than anyone, and that's why her books are so masterful. So yeah, occasionally you might identify with something that a murderer has said. Most of the time you won't, but every now and then you'll be like, oh yeah, I see that. Like, you know, my compulsions to have people like everything that I do isn't related to me committing murders, it's to me writing novels, so it's a slightly different vibe. And speaking of committing murders and writing novels, Blackwater by Joyce Carol Oates. Continuing along in our depression spiral, I read this book for my dissertation, along with her much longer novel about Marilyn Monroe, Blonde, which is what that movie Blonde was supposedly based off of, but no, it wasn't. Maybe one day I'll make a video about how much that movie makes me angry, but we don't have time for that, so let's move on. I loved this book. Maybe loved isn't the right word. I hated it. Was disgusted by it. Was moved to tears by it. Put it down over and over again because it was unbearable to read. But that's all by design. Her books are pretty much all like that. Blackwater is about the Chappaquiddick incident in 1969, in which Senator Ted Kennedy, yes, those Kennedys, left a party with 28-year-old Mary Jo Kopechne and drove at dangerous speeds down a dirt road, driving them off a narrow bridge and into a tidal pond. The car overturned with them both inside, but Kennedy got out and swam to shore. He left the scene and did not report the incident until the next morning. Mary might have died anyway. But we'll never know because he just left her there to drown. This book is a poetic, disjointed, semi-fictionalized account of that night from the woman's perspective as she drowns. It is not a happy read, especially when you know that it was based on something that did actually happen, but it's an important one. It's devastating, but that's by design. She was not screaming, nor was she sobbing, knowing that the oxygen in this darkness must not be depleted, but she spoke loudly and clearly, her throat raw. Here, I'm here, I'm here! She was not hysterical. She was not paralyzed with terror. She could hear him, somewhere above. The surface of the water was close above. There he moved cautiously in the shadows. He was diving, swimming to save her where she was trapped in the dark, so she must guide him. I'm here, I'm here, I'm here! As the black water rose about her to fill her lungs. So to bring the mood back up a bit, our penultimate title is somewhat perfect for this video. Lost in a Good Book by Jasper Fforde, which is the second book in the Thursday Next series about jumping through novels and solving literary crimes. The first, The Eyre Affair, is about saving a kidnapped Jane Eyre, and it's great. The first book of his that I read was Shades of Grey, about a world where people can only see one colour at a time and it depends on their social class, and I fell in love immediately. And finally, the sequel is coming out this year and I'm beyond excited. But in the years where I waited for that, I read all his Thursday Next books, and also his DCI Jack Sprat books, which are also literary crime based, but on nursery rhymes. The Big Over Easy is about who killed Humpty Dumpty, and it's great. Lost in a Good Book is one of my personal favourites, however, and not just because of the title. It turns out Thursday's husband died 38 years ago, and nobody remembers him at all, so she must delve back through fictional worlds to find him. The reason this one is my favourite? Time travel, baby! It always comes down to time travel with me. It's the reason my world goes round. So obviously, the quote from this book is, "He took a bite from his sandwich. Lesson 1 in time travel, Thursday. First of all, we are all time travellers. The vast majority of us manage only 1 day per day. Now, if we accelerate ourselves like so, the clouds gathered speed above our heads and the trees shook faster in the light breeze. By the light of the moon, I could see that the pace of the river had increased dramatically. A convoy of lorries sped past us in sudden accelerated movement. This is about 20 days per day, every minute compressed into about 3 seconds. Any slower, and we would be visible. As it is, an outside observer might think he saw a man and a woman sitting under those trees, but if he looked again, we would be gone. Ever thought you saw someone, then looked again only to find them gone? Sure. And finally, wrapping up this video with a bang or a whimper, depending on how much you like prose and poetry and me reading it to you, The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. Honestly, while I have a lot of rotating favourite books, this one is probably the one that comes up the most. Which is crazy, because if you asked me if I liked historical war fiction, I'd probably give you a look of derision and move myself to a different seat on the tube to avoid further conversation. And yet, that's basically what this book is. The difference is that it's narrated by death themselves, and that it has some of the most beautiful prose I've ever read in my life. I have a million favourite quotes from this book, but because I can't just sit here and read you the whole thing from start to finish, although God, I would, I'm just gonna read the opening pages, the prologue, because this hooked me faster than any other book has ever done. First the colours, then the humans. That's usually how I see things, or at least how I try. Here is a small fact. You are going to die. I am, in all truthfulness, attempting to be cheerful about this whole topic, though most people find themselves hindered in believing me no matter my protestations. Please, trust me. I most definitely can be cheerful. I can be amiable, agreeable, affable, and that's only the A's. Just don't ask me to be nice. Nice has nothing to do with me. Reaction to the aforementioned fact. Does this worry you? I urge you, do not be afraid. I'm nothing if not fair. Of course, an introduction, a beginning. Where are my manners? I could introduce myself properly, but it's not really necessary. You will know me well enough and soon enough, depending on a diverse range of variables. It suffices to say that at some point in time I will be standing over you as genially as possible. Your soul will be in my arms. A colour will be perched on my shoulder. I will carry you gently away. At that moment you will be lying there. I rarely find people standing up. You'll be caked in your own body. There might be a discovery, a scream will dribble down the air, the only sounds I'll hear after that will be my own breathing and the sound of the smell of my footsteps. The question is, what colour will everything be at that moment when I come for you? What will the sky be saying? Personally, I like a chocolate-coloured sky. Dark, dark chocolate. People say it suits me. I do, however, try to enjoy every colour I see, the whole spectrum. A billion or so flavours, none of them quite the same, and a sky to slowly suck on. It takes the edge off the stress. It helps me relax. A small theory. People observe the colours of a day only at its beginnings and ends, but to me it's quite clear that a day merges through a multitude of shades and intonations with each passing moment. A single hour can consist of thousands of different colours. Waxy yellows, cloud spat blues, murky darknesses. In my line of work, I make it a point to notice them. As I've suggested, my one saving grace is distraction. It keeps me sane, helps me cope, considering the length of time I've been performing this job. The trouble is, who could ever replace me? Who could step in while I take a break in your stock-standard resort-style holiday destination, whether it be tropical or of the ski trip variety? The answer, of course, is nobody, which has prompted me to make a conscious, deliberate decision. To make distraction my holiday. Needless to say, I holiday in increments. In colours. Still, it's possible you might be asking, why does he even need a holiday? What does he need distraction from? Which brings me to my next point. It's the leftover humans. The survivors. They're the ones I can't stand to look at, although on many occasions I still fail. I deliberately seek out the colours to keep my mind off them, but now and then I witness the ones who are left behind, crumbling among the jigsaw puzzles of realisation, despair, and surprise. They have punctured hearts. They have beaten lungs, which in turn brings me to the subject I am telling you about tonight or today, or whatever the hour and colour. It's the story of one of those perpetual survivors, an expert at being left behind. It's just a small story, really, about, amongst other things, a girl, some words, an accordionist, some fanatical Germans, a Jewish fistfighter, and quite a lot of thievery. I saw The Book Thief 3 times. Listen, if you don't want to read this book right now, we could probably never be friends. Which is a little bit heartbreaking, honestly. I love this book, I'm mostly only joking, but I think it's important for the soul to read things that are going to break your heart. I love this book so much. So before I move on, I want to leave you with one last quote, maybe my favourite in the whole book, and one that I think about at least once a week. I know it so well I don't even need to look it up in the book. I have hated words, and I have loved them, and I hope I have made them right. So, it's been a while. I know I brought it up in my last video. This video was originally supposed to be my first video back, but my last video ended up, I was a bit more passionate about it. And honestly, I needed a break after the last few videos. I've been really productive for a while, but work and fatigue was starting to catch up to me, and making videos just wasn't viable for a little while there. Plus, I went to New York for a week for my friend's birthday, met my best friend of 5 years and stayed at her apartment, and then came back and immediately went right back to work. So I've been trying to figure out the balance of life and, other bits of life. I definitely have to get evaluated for whatever chronic fatigue thing I have going on, because it's just progressively getting worse, but I'm going to do what I've always done with my health issues and ignore it until it becomes literally impossible to do so. Hopefully, I'll get back into the swing of things a bit now. Just because I haven't been posting doesn't mean I haven't been working on videos at all. I have a lot of ideas and a whole bunch of half-written scripts about various things, up to and including the Shadow and Bone series on Netflix, another overused dictionary corner, a long video ranking my favourite time loop stories across all mediums, a possibly even longer video about Psych, and more entries in my cringe culture series and K-drama and BL series, because I always have more stuff to say about them. In the meantime, what are your book recommendations? What are your favourite quotes from them? Should I do a version of this with TV shows? What video of mine are you most looking forward to now that I've just teased a bunch? I love reading your comments, and not just because comment engagement boosts the algorithm, although that does help, but because it genuinely makes me happy to know people are engaging with my content and why. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe, or don't, I'm not your mother. But take care out there, and whenever you feel lost or confused or stressed or unsure of your place in the world, I recommend finding your nearest library or bookshop and finding some pages to lose yourself in. If that doesn't work, try TV shows or video games, or just going outside and lying in the grass. It's okay to feel lost. The world's insane right now. Everything's a mess. You don't have to keep pretending everything's fine just because everyone else is. It's not fine. We're not fine, but we're here, so we move forward. We fight, we make mistakes, we pick ourselves up, and then we do it again. As Douglas Adams once said, the knack of flying is learning to throw yourself at the ground and miss.